Hi, I'm Tanya from Beacon Business Consultants, and I'm here with Andrew today. I'll let him introduce himself and you can meet him.
Hi, so I'm Andrew Beaumont. I run AJB HR Consultancy Services Limited. Thank you for having me, Tanya.
No problem. So obviously, given that, as you've just told them, you're a HR consultant, I wanted to have a chat with you today to talk through the potential pitfalls and things people need to look out for in business from a HR point of view, because obviously nowadays there's a lot of risk, but you still need people, so we need to get around it, really. So how have you found it in the last year working in HR and the shift to assisting others with making the switch to working from home?
It's been an interesting last 12 months, or since the pandemic started. I think it's been a period where HR has been able to demonstrate its value where perhaps previously the value wasn't known, certainly to the smaller businesses. It's been incredibly fast changing. And I, like a lot of other people, have struggled to keep up with all of the changes. So it's been an interesting year. And
well, I suppose there's been times as well where, people have been emailing you or ringing you on a Monday morning saying, well, how's this new rule affect me? And you've said, well, hang on, I found out at 8 o'clock last night as well, and I'll get back to you in an hour or so.
Yeah, and I mean, when we went into lockdown 3, if it's lockdown 3 last week, it started pretty much straight after the Prime Minister's announcement, because we'd come out of lockdown and we've moved where we are with furlough a number of times, and the dates have been changing, and then suddenly, especially having retail clients, suddenly they're back in a situation where, hang on, potentially we've got to close again. My hospitality clients had gone from reopening and having, because of the tier system, I'd got hospitality clients that that couldn't open, and hospitality clients that were open. Retail was all over the place, and then suddenly we've gone straight back into lockdown. So it started pretty much straight after Boris's announcement and has carried on right the way through.
Yeah, so a busy year for you then.
Yes.
This video is predominantly aimed at those businesses looking to build on their successes and to grow. And with that in mind, what are some of the dangers business owners do face when taking on staff, and the things they need to be aware of?
I think one of the big things is, and it wasn't well publicised prior to the pandemic, but then the pandemic obviously became the focal point of everybody's everybody's life anyway. But all the law, all the employment law, all the regulations around what needs to go into a contract of employment changed in April last year. Yeah. There was a little, as I say, not well publicised piece of law called the Good Work Plan, which effectively was designed to protect employees and give them a firm understanding of the relationship with their employer and what they could expect. But what it means from an employer point of view is that if you hire an employee, they have to have a statement of terms and conditions, contracts for employment to you and I, on day one. So the day they start, they have to be issued with a contract of employment.
And we know that many small businesses, that was not something that ever happened before April.
That's absolutely right.
And on day one.
Yeah, and with the internet being the way it is, you can download contracts of employment very easily and find templates from them. But a lot of the, certainly the ones that I've come across over the past year when I've been taking on new clients, weren't compliant. So it's absolutely worth reviewing the contracts that you do have in place and working out when they were issued, because if they were, however they were written, if they were written before April 20, chances are they're not compliant with the current legislation.
Yeah, well, I obviously had you review my contracts of employment as well, didn't I? But it, like you say, it wasn't something that with the pandemic that took over all the news, and it isn't something that actually a lot of people even knew changed, unless you're in the trade like you are. So obviously that's a big problem. Now, at the other end of the scale, then, what about if we need to lose staff? There's various methods used, obviously, redundancy, dismissal. What are the problems that we face when trying to do this?
I think, again, it comes down to understanding of the legal, the legal position. But I also think we're in a world now that's becoming increasingly litigious. And actually, I tend to work with when I'm working with my clients, I just tend to teach them to follow three things. Hire the right people, treat them the right way. And if you've got difficult discussions to have, be open and honest with them. Because there's so much legislation now around, discrimination and people being treated correctly and all of that kind of stuff. And actually, it can scare employers from initially hiring people, but then also when there are issues, they can have a fear about, well, if I dismiss, if I get rid of the individual, I'm going to end up in tribunal.
Yeah.
And actually, there will, no matter how hard you work as an employer to try and hire the right people for your organization, you will make at some point a bad hire. Even if it's just the fact that the individual doesn't match with your business values, or the credibility is not there, the gravitas isn't there between the two of you, however it may be. Effectively, until an individual has worked for an employer for 2 years, they have very little in the way of employment rights. Now, they are covered by discrimination, so disability, race, religion, and all of that kind of stuff. They could go down a discrimination route, but effectively, if you've got an individual working for you and it's not working out the way that you want it to, the risks are very, very minimal in exiting them in the first couple of years.
Yeah, I mean, that's really good in a way to protect the employers, because otherwise it's that taking the risk on taking people on, and realistically the economy, they need us to be doing that. Small businesses, they've got to take people on, and it does protect people in that way. I mean, obviously it's not very good for the employee, but equally, if they're doing their job right, hopefully, there are some unscrupulous employers out there, of course there are, that will just get rid of people for incorrect reasons, if you like. But then they're not someone you really want to be working for long term either.
No, that's true. And I mean, one of the big things, Tanya, that often gets missed is employee engagement. If you're putting a contract of employment in place for your employees, it's showing them that they actually belong, and that you care about them and the fact that they are part of your workforce. Yeah. But if 6 months, 12 months down the line, it hasn't worked out, and they're not performing, or even, as I said, it's just the relationship isn't there. Just have the discussion with them, because just because you can exit somebody safely and easily from the business in the first couple of years, there's still a right way to treat somebody. And chances are, if as the business owner, you're not feeling the relationship, they're probably not feeling it either. No. In so many cases, the individual is probably sat there thinking, this isn't what I thought it was going to be, but actually, I'm getting a salary every month, so I'll stick it out for a little bit. But if they're not engaged and you're not feeling it, it's better to cut it, because you one of the most powerful tools you can have as a business owner is engaged employees.
Yeah.
Because if they love what they're doing and they love the company they're working for, it's going to make it so easy for you.
Yeah, definitely. It's funny actually, because I like the quote where they say, what if we spend all this money training our employees and they leave? And then of course it's the, yes, but what if we don't and they stay?
Yes.
What have you got then?
Yeah.
And I think with employees, I've experienced it myself and needed to get rid of people for various reasons along the way. I've even done a gross misconduct before. It's not an enjoyable process ever getting rid of somebody, but equally your business can't be a charity, because otherwise there's no business for everyone else that works there in the long run. So you can't, you've got to be true to yourself and do what's right for the business and for you predominantly. I've actually worked with people before that, they work for me, and I've not even liked going downstairs to my own workshop because somebody's got such an attitude problem. And, that's not a long-term solution. And you think you put up with it for a period of time whilst you're, especially when it's over 2 years and you're working out the best way to go about it. And, in the back of your mind, you're dealing with it, and it was dealt with, but it's difficult times for people, a lot of pressure.
Yeah, and one of the things that was introduced last year in the Good Work Plan that now has to go into contract for employment is a probation period.
Yeah.
And whilst a lot of organisations do use them, there's never been a legal requirement, and it now is a legal requirement to put it in a contract for employment. But it's interesting because actually it carries no weight legally. So if you set a probation period for 6 months, you can still dismiss an individual at month 8, month 9.
Yeah.
And not have to do any more work than you would win their probation period. So it's actually
interesting, isn't it? Because from employees, I don't think necessarily realise that. So they think once I'm at my 3 or 6 months probation, I can start being the real me. And that's not really a good idea.
No, but from a business owner point of view, probation period is almost a kind of red herring in a contract for employment, because you don't have to make the decision within that 6 month period. If you've got an issue at month 10, month 11, your options are still the same. Yes,
exactly. Yeah. I mean, I've extended probationary periods before when they haven't passed it as well, because at least then they know that they're not, they are still under examination, if you like, because they aren't where they needed to be at that time. And I've done that before, even though, like you say, you've got the 2 years, so it doesn't really.
Yeah, but your stance is spot on, Tanya, because it goes back again to treating people the right way. You absolutely could, as a business owner, turn around to somebody, you could walk into your business tomorrow, turn around to a member of staff who's been with you less than 2 years and say, here's a letter, I'm terminating your employment now. And not say anything else to them, not give them any other stuff. And legally, you're absolutely fine. That's never going to backfire on you. But ultimately, you've got an employee there that's an individual that, needs treated the right way. They need to know where the gaps are.
Yeah. And the thing is as well, especially if you've got young staff, you could be their first job. You could be, their first job not in bar work, for example, where there's sort of a different expectation. Your first adult job where you're expecting them to behave like adults and really be part of a team. And realistically, you're part of their education process, whether you think that or not, you are. And you need to be able to help them for their next employer.
Yes.
And if that means, like you say, having the odd difficult conversation, it needs to be had, doesn't it?
Yes.
So if people have been there for more than 2 years, it is still possible to dismiss people as well past the 2 years without fear of tribunal if you do it the right way, which also means obviously they need to seek advice, really, because the chances of getting it wrong are high if you try and do it yourself.
Yes. So once you hire, as an employer, once you hire an individual, whilst there are hundreds of policies that you could write, legally, the only policies that you actually require from an employment law point of view are a disciplinary policy and a grievance policy.
Yeah.
So the three things technically, if you're hiring your first employee, technically the three things should come in parallel with each other: contract of employment, disciplinary policy, grievance policy. And then as you build up, once you get over 5 employees, the law changes around health and safety and all of that kind of stuff. But if you've got a disciplinary policy, just follow it. It will explain, how to call a hearing, who can chair the hearing, right of appeal, all of that kind of stuff. Because, once an individual's been with you for 2 years, they can claim, they can go down an avenue of unfair dismissal if they choose. If you've got a policy, a disciplinary policy that's in place, and you followed it, the chances of that dismissal being unfair are very, very small.
Yeah.
Because you followed your laid down policy.
And you've also got the risk that if they choose to leave by themselves because you've made their life so difficult at work that they hand their notice in, which in the old days was something that happened a lot, then you've got the constructive dismissal route, of course.
You have, but if you've got a grievance policy in place, if the individual leaves and doesn't follow the grievance policy prior to leaving and then tries to claim constructive dismissal, again, their chances of a successful claim are minimal, because any tribunal would expect an individual to exhaust internal processes first.
Yeah. And that's the whole thing of having these 2 documents in place, isn't it? The 2 policies. Now, mine are within the employee handbook, and that's something else I wanted to talk to you about, because I know that there's a big emphasis on culture in the workplace these days as well, and it's something I personally think is very important, I'm passionate about. But I've heard you say before that you can tailor employee handbooks to the workplace to reflect their culture rather than just being these generic documents. And yes, whilst there's certain things that need to be included for the employee, such as the disciplinary guidance, the companies such as Corona and Citation, these large companies, you get quite a generic document from them. And can you tell us about how the businesses that you've helped with the more personalized employee handbooks, how they've used them and how they've benefited from these tools you've created?
Yeah, I think it's a great question. I think the one thing I would say with, that there is, Citation, Corona, Peninsula, the people that you've mentioned, the big HR providers, absolutely do a job. They will be able to provide a staff handbook that will cover off all the policies and procedures that as an employer you need. Where I tend to work with my clients is I start with their values, mission statement at the front, all of that kind of stuff, and then tailor the policies that are in there around the employee values. So employer values, excuse me. And actually, so as an employee is reading through the staff handbook, they're able to tailor, they're able to see how the policies link in with the values, and how they've been, specifically written. And again, it all goes back to that engagement piece and about being a decent place to work, because you don't have to have an employee handbook. There's no requirement to do it, but it just shows, if that's sat there and it's all nicely presented and all that kind of stuff, and it's sat there on day one alongside the employment contract, it just helps them feel again as though they belong. And I think the other thing with employee handbooks is that if you're as a company, you're turning around and saying, you know, we want to be a great place to work.
I can see your friend.
We want to be a great place to work. And then your employee handbook just does statutory holiday or statutory maternity pay or things like that. The values and the policy don't link in with each other.
Yeah.
And that's, you know, that's a huge thing. So if during induction you're turning around to your new starters and saying we're a great place to work, you know, we really value our staff, then you know, you've used a generic employee handbook, which has statutory holiday in, for instance, the two things aren't going to match up.
Yeah, and a lot of the things in there are deemed to be negative anyway, aren't they? You know, it's disciplinary grievance. You know, you can't do this. You must wear this uniform. You must this. It's all they can be quite strict, really.
Yes, very much so. Very much so. And it doesn't need to be. It can't be seen as a, you know, these are all the sticks we're going to beat you with during your employment. That's not what an employee handbook is about. It's about, these are our values, this is our mission statement, and these are the policies that tie in with that and show you what's expected of you during your employment, but also what we're going to do for you as your employer. And there is, you know, we talked a little bit earlier about employment contracts, and employees usually understand what that is. But there's also a second contract that always comes into play in every employee-employer relationship, and that's a psychological contract. Has no legal weighting, clearly, but, you know, as an employer, you have an idea in your head of what you expect from your employees.
Yeah.
But that's also reciprocated the other way around. So they expect to come to work, you know, from an employee point of view, they expect to turn up, be paid for the job that they're doing, the amount that you say you're going to pay them, look after their health and safety, give them an opportunity if they feel that they're not being treated correctly to raise it. That's their side of it. And that's where things like the grievance procedure comes in, because the grievance procedure gives them a safe space to talk, you know, an avenue to be able to raise concerns. And if you tie that in with an equal ops procedure or a bullying and harassment procedure that says, do you know what, if you flag in concerns to us as your employer, we promise you that you won't be subject to treated differently because you've raised concerns.
Yeah.
It's all that employee journey, you know, it's protecting you as the business owner, which is absolutely key, but it's also that whole employee journey piece.
And would you say then that by working with someone like you, with a smaller consultancy that is bespoke, as opposed to one of these bigger companies, is that what they're really getting? Because I know that, like, working with you is basically like having a HR director without the ongoing cost of doing that every month, if you like. I mean, yeah, they can pay you monthly, but it's not as expensive because you're not going to be in there day in, day out. Would you say that that's one of the biggest benefits you can offer people with these tailored documents, as well as the ad hoc support? They can just phone you anytime. But that's where you differentiate from these big companies.
Yeah, absolutely. So I market myself as a bespoke HR consultancy because I will never issue the same document twice. So every contract of employment, whilst the terms and conditions that go in there, you know, a lot of it's a legal requirement. There's also a lot of stuff that goes in there that needs to go in to protect the employer that isn't a legal requirement. So things like, you know, restrictive covenants. If an individual leaves you, how long, you know, what can they and can't they do? You know, so they don't try and go to a competitor and take all of your data, all of that kind of stuff. And that you know, that would be tailored specifically to the client. Now, you know, a small you know, a small takeaway, a small, you know, restaurant that stand alone isn't necessarily going to need the same protection there as, a graphic design agency or an IT company. Yeah, absolutely. Where there's a fundamental risk of that data getting into the wrong hands.
Yeah.
But I think the other big thing as well with going with somebody like me is the fact that you're not going to have, if you've got an immediate HR need that you need advice and guidance on, you're not going to have to phone a phone number up and go through various different options. But more importantly than that, you're always going to get to speak to the same person.
And you start to know the business in detail, don't you? So you know these people that people are talking about, previous issues, and you'll start to notice patterns forming perhaps as well, where when sometimes using a consultant for something, the fact that they're removed from the day-to-day running of the business helps massively, because you're taking that step back, aren't you? And you are saying, well, actually, have you really thought about this? Because this has happened before.
Yes, absolutely. And I mean, in a lot, I designed my entire model, Tanya, to take away everything that business owners don't particularly want to do from a people side. So even things like, I have a lot of clients where I sign on their behalf in terms of HR paperwork. So contracts of employment, for instance, go out from here, from home, or from my office, and come back there, and I physically hold all the staff files electronically.
Yeah.
So the employer, the client, has nothing to do with any of this in terms of paperwork. So, I get all of the ID, etc. And then if there's anything that they do need, I've got it all scanned and it's all there for them electronically.
Yeah.
But it's
fantastic as well, isn't it? Because then the business owner can focus on what their strengths are, and they haven't got.
Absolutely.
The problem is it's such a big topic that's really dangerous if you get it wrong. For your business and financially. And the thing is, by doing that and using you, they've got the benefit of the fact they're not having to necessarily have those difficult conversations if they're not that way inclined, because you'll even do the disciplinary procedures for them, won't you? And
absolutely.
And, it's difficult as well, because of course, if you're putting in the grievance procedure and you're essentially a small owner managed business, they're going to raise a grievance with you, and you're the one that gave them the disciplinary, because there is no one else. So by having you involved, then you bring in that second person, the external element.
Yeah.
So it's
absolutely
benefits, really. We're going to have another chat later to date about mental health as a topic, because it is such a big topic. But I did just want to ask you about, obviously, we're all have a mounting pressure to ensure that we support our employees with mental health. Have you noticed a shift with your clients, or are you having to lead the way?
I think clients that I already have are relatively good at this.
I suppose that's because of your education along the way.
Well, it is that, Tanya, but it's also, I think certain sectors, there's certain sectors that have just been able to adjust to the pandemic, and so I'm thinking I work with a lot of accountants, a lot of solicitors. They're able just to work from home, and in a lot of cases have always been able. I think where I've had the biggest difficulty this year, or over the last year, in terms of what I've seen, is the fact that furlough and working from home have often been seen as an absolute godsend to employees, and that's often not the case. And one of the things that I talk an awful lot about on my LinkedIn, on my social media, and when I'm out doing training with clients, is about how important it is as a leader to get to know your staff, get to know them personally, get to know what the family situation is, you know, what they do at weekends, find out when they come back in on Monday, what they've done at the week, all of this kind of stuff. Not for any other reason than just it helps you understand them as an individual. And why that's important is, you know, when we went into lockdown and first lockdown in March last year, a lot of businesses were turning around and saying, well, we're furloughing all of the staff now, so you know you need go back home. You're on 80% of your salary. The bit that they didn't do after that was check in with the staff, and I can see why it's deemed as you know, beneficial to the staff to leave them at home on, you know, on 80% of salary. In a lot of cases, they've not got lunch to buy, they've not got commuting to do, so they're probably not a million miles away at home earning what they were earning going into the office. The big bit that was missed was the fact that if that individual, if your employee lives on their own, they could be in a situation where their only daily interaction with other humans is in the office. Yeah. Suddenly that's been taken away from them through no fault of their own. Now, equally, a lot of the messages over the last year have been, there's been confusing messages. Sometimes, you know, they've contradicted themselves, and a lot of employers, when they heard your staff can't do any work for you, what they were interpreting was, therefore we can't get in touch with them. Yeah, and that was never the case. So
yeah, because technically they're employed and they've got normal working hours. So if you're contacting them in their normal working hours, like you say, for non-productive profit earning work, you couldn't you? And you could even do training with them, but checking in was obviously would have been very important for many people.
Yeah, and it's, you know, and practically from a HR side, I know, you know, I've done HR for a long time now. I know there will be in every sector employees who will try and make the best of the situation, try and manipulate it to their advantage. You'll never get around that, you know. But by and large, you know, employees tend to be decent people who've been put in a situation that they weren't expecting, that the employer wasn't expecting. But a lot of the time, you know, the last year has left employees with huge issues to resolve. Yeah, and you'll get this as well. But from a you know, from a childcare point of view, you know, if the schools are closed and because the first time the schools were closed, you know, properly closed, what do you do as an employee for childcare? And you know, typically over the summer holidays, over Easter last year, over, you know, the bank holidays in May, the default position in a lot of scenarios would have been, let's use grandparents. Grandparents are of a certain age typically where, you know, they're going to be the ones that are shielding, you know, the ones that are higher risk.
Well, originally there was no, like, you weren't supposed to use your grandparents for childcare, were you? That was the thing. I mean, now it's different and you can, but obviously you don't really want to. You know, you don't want to be responsible for killing off your parents because you asked them to look after your kids.
Absolutely. So, you know, I've had calls over, and a lot of the time, you know, with HR, because it is a very reactive industry, but a lot of the time I've had calls from, you know, new clients saying, this is my issue, I need help with it. And the issue has been, you know, we've now gone back to work post lockdown. You know, we want to get the business back online. I need my staff back. I'm actually getting staff members turning around and saying they can't come into work because they've got no childcare. So I want to discipline them. Now, don't get me wrong, absolutely, you know, absolutely, that is an option. But my advice back to the client would be, how does that resolve it? You know, if you discipline that member of staff, that's not suddenly going to develop find them a childcare solution. They're
Yeah.
not suddenly going to turn around and think, right, do you know what? I'm going to leave my child at home all day so I don't lose my job.
Yeah, exactly. And it's not going to help your working relationship going forward after this.
No. So you know, they still haven't got childcare. You still haven't got them in the business. If you dismiss them, you then, you know, they still haven't, still haven't got childcare unless they do it themselves. But actually, then you've got to go, you know, you've got to find a way of replacing that staff member and all of that kind of stuff. And working from home, working remotely, in a lot of cases, the objection to it from employers' point of views was trust. Ultimately,
yeah, micromanagement at the end of the day, isn't it?
Yeah.
That's what they're used to, but it's changed.
Yeah, why would I let my employees sit at home all day and work from home? I can't monitor what they're doing. But actually, you know, businesses were forced into it. And in a lot of cases, businesses have actually been more productive remotely than they were when they were office-based. And there will be
good employees also want to prove that they're doing a good job. They're under massive pressure to prove the exact same thing. They know you can't monitor them properly and in the way that historically you could have done and that you want to, and therefore they're under a lot of pressure to make sure they probably do more work than normal in a lot of cases because they need to be proving themselves. They feel that whether they need to or whether they feel like they need to, it's still the same outcome.
Yes. And employees will remember how they were treated by their employer during the pandemic. And you know, and if it hasn't gone right, and if they haven't been treated right, you know, when furlough comes to an end, there's a chance that employers will lose their best staff.
Yeah. As soon as there's more jobs out there, they're going to be looking for someone else, aren't they?
Yeah, but if you're an employer out there at the moment, and because not every industry can accommodate working from home genuinely, but if you've been able to accommodate working from home because of the whole "if you can work from home you should" directive, I would now be thinking, what does your organization, your business look like post pandemic? Because we'll come through this, we'll come out the other side of it. Do you actually need the amount of office space that you've got? Could you lease part of it out? Could you and cut down on your utilities and all of this kind of stuff?
I know companies that even after the first lockdown, they did it. They've lost many of their sites, their office sites, and gone to working from home with a view to not going back to it after the pandemic because they know that now that it works.
Yeah.
The difficult thing is, of course, some employees do actually like going into the office, but you could have a flexible system where, they've got that flexible office space that they can do a bit of both, which I think most employees would go for. If they had a choice, they would choose to do a bit of both, because I think everyone will have a shock if they had to go back to commuting 5 days a week now.
Yeah. And genuinely, and I'm not basing this on anything else other than gut instinct on what I've actually seen, I'm not convinced businesses will go back to 9 to 5 office based.
No. Well, I think in a way, actually, for years, it's been pushing towards being more flexible. There has been a push for flexi time for years, and this has actually forced everybody's hand. And it's forced a lot of people that wouldn't have even entertained letting people work from home. It's forced them to do that and actually made them realise that it is possible.
Yeah, absolutely.
So, well, thank you so much, Andrew. It's been really interesting, and hopefully everyone else finds it interesting, and then they can contact you directly if they need anything to know anything more specific for their business.
Okay, you're very welcome. Thank you again for having me.
Thank you.